Welcome, welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. And today is Friday, which means we got some philosophy coming your way. Actually, less philosophy today. I think more listicle podcast. I don't even know what the right expression is for a podcast that is a list. But welcome, my co-host Duncan Palamortis. How you doing, sir?
Good. I'm excited about today.
What is today? Let's clue the audience in.
Sure.
Even though they've seen the title of the episode by now, so they probably already have some clues. But for the terrible detectives among the listeners,
Absolutely. No, I mean, a lot of things that we do when every Friday when we talk about a lot of things give the listener clues as to what our interests are. But many of the listeners may not know that besides poker and philosophy, we have some other interests. So I thought it would be interesting so people can get a little bit of a context in some of where some of our ideas are coming from, or some of the other interests that we may be
sure.
spending a lot of time
Yeah.
on a
So
daily, weekly basis.
yeah. So what we're gonna do is basically we're gonna take turns with our five things that we're very interested in. And you did set some ground rules before we dive in, right?
Right. So I have some idea for some rules. At least I'm going to set them for myself. Like you feel free to set some ground rules for yourself. Like for
I will
example,
follow your rules, Duncan, to the T.
I don't know about that. So number one, we're talking about interests. We're not talking about things that are important. So for example, we're not going to mention family. Obviously, this is as far as I know, it's at the top of both of our lists. So we're going to talk about
I'm not very interested in family. Speak for yourself.
I know. I'm so condescending. I know. So another thing is that they're not going to be in any particular order. It's difficult to rank those things. When you do one thing, you're not doing another thing. So it takes priority on that specific moment. For me, I want to avoid things that are obvious. Like I don't want to mention math, poker, and philosophy. Like these are the three things that obviously everybody knows I'm interested in. And but I don't know about you, Brad. If you want to mention something,
I'm gonna mention poker.
Okay.
So I've already broke your rules.
Okay, that's
I play by my own rules, Duncan.
That's what I told you from the beginning. It's your own rules. That's why I don't want to set rules for other people. Everybody's unique and different. So so why don't we take it away, and you can start with the number one on your list.
Yeah, so number one on my list is leadership and communication.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that very much interests me. I think maybe it's always interested me as a person. I think I've had a knack for connecting people. I think I'm a connector. I haven't read that book, but my wife labeled me as a connector. But I really enjoy having conversations. I really enjoy learning about people. I really enjoy figuring out how to effectively communicate to a wide range of people who are coming from many different paradigms. So like, I think communication in a poker coach, communication as a podcaster, communication as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as a son, in every area of life, communication is quite important to me. And so like that's something that I'm very interested in, constantly reading books, constantly replaying conversations that I've had, trying to figure out sticking points, how to do a better job of working through them, just taking responsibility. And then it ties into leadership. I think those two are pretty closely related. Running my coaching for profit program, the Wolves, just figuring out the right buttons to press with both individuals and then a collective group, because as you know, like being a leader is complicated, and there's no like one size fits all approach. Some things are more effective with other people. So you just have to like basically use the data points that you have, and kind of in the same way that you play poker, try to work from the information that you have to make the best decision that you can, which, is to say that I've gotten things wrong as a leader. But again, that just gives me a target to shoot at and something to reflect on, and then figure out how to do better in the future.
What are some things that you learned from your studies that you used to do wrong and now you corrected, or you're still working on it, or anything of that sort?
I've learned that being hard on people is okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm don't think I'm naturally an asshole. Like, I mean, maybe I am. I guess that's debatable and
Yes.
subjective. Everybody's got their own personal
Mm.
experiences with me, and I will assume that there are other people in the world
Sure.
that would disagree.
Sure.
Um, I don't. It's just not natural for me to like be very hard on students, be very hard
Mm-hmm.
on people. It's something that I've had to grow into, but now that I kind of recognize that certain people respond very well to harsh criticism,
Mm-hmm.
that's what they need, and so like I try to give it to people, those types of people, hard. Um, and then I think there's other people that will be resistant to that too. So yeah, being hard on people, holding them accountable, uh, understanding that as a leader, I've got to be responsible for my own behavior. I have to lead from the front, so I have to set a very high standard for the folks who are counting on me. Like specifically right now would be the CPG Wolves. So yeah, I think those are a lot of the things that I think about, and just figuring out where the buttons are, how to create protocols, identifying blind spots and upgrading those. I mean, there's probably an infinite number of things that
Sure.
I've upgraded over time.
Is there something tangible or a process that it helps you put everything together, whether it is like, mental note taking, actual note taking, or some sort of like um, uh, some sort of uh, log that you keep on some of these things? Like,
Well, for me, like as the Wolves head coach and as the leader, my feedback mechanism is results. And I can tangibly see how we're doing over
yeah,
time from month to month. And so like I know that I'm pressing the right buttons when the data points are telling me like, oh, we're progressing forward. We're not making the same mistakes again and again and again, or we're minimizing them as much as we possibly can. Those are really the biggest indicators to me that show my progression.
very good, very good.
All right. So for you, what's your
So
first interest slash hobby?
I was probably going to put that later on the list, but because it's related to what you just said, I'm going to stay a little bit on topic. And probably one of the things that I absolutely hate, but I see myself compulsively doing it. That's writing. I write, and I'm writing specifically on that Yeah, it's a weird thing, like I feel like I cannot escape from it, because it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this bird.
I'm just recalling this like 2,000 word response in Slack that is like now infamous and legendary in Greatness Village,
Right.
for being the longest message of all time, running out
Ever.
of characters. Yeah, ever.
Ever anywhere on the planet.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the thing is that I have this burning sensation uh to I'm so interested in that concept of, you mentioned communication. That's something that interests me very much. The idea of why there's disagreement, the idea of why people, it's not just the disagreement itself, the disagreement I understand, but why people have arguments, for example, like the arguments that uh, couples have, or the arguments that political parties have. And sometimes, I mean, there's power plays, but even when people mean well, that's probably the most surprising thing of all. Why do people have bring so much pain and suffering to themselves? And that's not an easy question, especially when both parties mean well and both parties are trying their best. So I'm writing this book, which probably I'm going to be writing for the next decade or so. The concept of the idea of meta humility, the idea of that it's not about winning the argument; it's about the idea of on getting on the other person's shoes and just be them for a minute. It's not about being right. It's not about win a battle. If you win an argument, you actually lose a war with somebody that potentially you're with, and you're a team. The important part is to have a win. So
Well, yeah, and there's also like a reframing too, and I've talked about it on the podcast before that like whenever you quote unquote lose an argument, so AKA you had an opinion, that opinion shifted through discourse, you're the one who's actively gained something there.
Oh, absolutely.
The other person has just, verified what, their existing belief, right? They've solidified that. But the person who actually learns is typically thought of as like the quote unquote loser of the argument, when the reality is like they're the one who gains something, and gaining something is more valuable than not.
Absolutely. And to clarify, I was actually talking about something slightly different, but what you said is actually on point. You're absolutely correct. So anytime there's a disagreement with somebody and you find the source of the disagreement, one of the two things is going to happen. Either, you will hopefully help the other person understand that they made a mistake, or you realize you made a mistake. Either way, that's progress. As a team, you made progress. Like everybody wins. What I was talking about more about was the idea that sometimes there is what I call hopefully compatibility of disagreement. In other words, there's two different oppositions. One example would be, for example, one person is a materialist and the other person is an idealist. There's nothing we can do about that to bridge that gap, because they start from two different axiomatic approaches to life, or like a pragmatist versus like a realist, and like people who have different approaches to life. And what I find incredibly interesting is that how convinced sometimes people are that the other person is wrong, even though there is a specific branching out of arguments that happen at a specific point, and neither of those two people can see in the conversation. That's the part that I'm interested in. Like the idea that I often say, you cannot disagree with conclusions. You have to disagree either with the premises, the rules of inference, or with the semantics. So you have to do a lot of work to disagree with somebody. That's why, for example, it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to disagree with someone like Noam Chomsky, not because his ideas are correct, but because he's done so much research that you have to do similar amount of research before you're capable of having a very fruitful disagreement with somebody who's that well read, right? Especially if they're talking about a subject that they're well aware, like linguistics, not when they're talking about other stuff that, it's that's the type of thing that I'm incredibly interested in. So I thought I should mention that, because I think communication is something that shows up a lot in education. So I'm not interested in education. I'm actually interested. I'm not going to mention education, just FYI. I'm interested in communication, how to bridge the gap between the things that, like the signals that one person sends to the other person. I often say that, the only reason why one person is the teacher and the other person is the student, it's not because one person knows and the other person doesn't. It's just because one person has more experience than the other. That's what separates the student from the teacher, just experience, nothing else. We're all students in some sense.
Yeah, I agree with the last statement, but overall, I think it's dumb and totally wrong.
What is?
Compatible disagreements, Duncan.
Our compatibility of disagreements? Okay,
yeah,
you're trolling me. I see. Okay.
You're wrong. Yeah.
What's next?
Poker.
Okay, beautiful. Nobody saw that coming.
Rule breaking number 1, poker.
I want to ask something about poker. You ready?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
What is something about poker that you do related to poker that most people don't expect that you do?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, I would say like, that's an interesting question. I think about poker a lot. Mm-hmm. Like I'm kind of a dreamer, and even though like to take pre-flop boot camp that has like, rigid protocols for pre-flop play, right? Just no mixed frequencies, everything is absolute. I still try to dream up things that I think theoretically might be quite good that other people may not do in various spots across the game tree. So like, I dream of things that the wolves can do that are not based on data, but are just based on my intuition and based on what kind of I know about human beings and the game itself. So I think that might be something that people may not see or recognize, is that some things some things that we test out are just dreamt up by me that I think will be good, but I don't have any data backing it.
And then, dreaming as in daydreaming or night dreaming or both?
It's all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Okay.
I think that like the listener may not be aware of how often I think about poker and
Mm-hmm.
how big a part of my life is poker,
Mm-hmm.
because it is from waking up to going to sleep. It's at the gym when, I'm listening to Audible. I will
Mm-hmm.
be taking notes on any thoughts or ideas or things to investigate, things to inspect, things to upgrade. Just today, I've done 4 coaching sessions already before recording this podcast with you. I'm constantly pouring through data. I'm constantly just analyzing everything that I can possibly analyze, to push my guys over the top. So like, yeah, I love data. I think data is like the way. I think it's a very scientific way, but I also, I love the magic in poker too. I try to think of the magic, like Phil's white magic, and ask like, what is that? Let's reverse engineer that. What's going on here? It's an interesting thing to me. Like
Absolutely.
anytime a player is doing something that has lots of success that the general population doesn't understand, I want to understand that thing a lot better, even if I don't have any data on it. So yeah, that might be something.
So some sort of like healthy obsession, or like you would say, we're a little bit crazy. So maybe some part of it is, who knows?
I think that I've recently come to the conclusion that in this space, I've got enough data now and I've gotten enough feedback that I'm just all in on what I'm trying to build. And
Makes sense.
being all in requires me to basically ensure that the program's a success and ensure that collectively we reach the vision that I have. So I take responsibility for that. And by taking responsibility for that, it's just every single moment of every single day, I'm thinking about what can I do? Like, how do I gain edge? How do we gain win rate? How do we stave off forgetting? How do we stay sharp? All of these things. How do we become more resilient? It's just a constant 24/7 thought in my brain.
Let me ask you about, because that's actually very interesting. So the idea of going all in and hyper focusing on a specific thing, which is very interesting to you. Do you think this is a necessary condition? Do you think this is a sufficient condition? And if so,
It's my
why?
interest. I love it.
No, I mean, if sorry, I should have been more specific. A necessary condition for success or sufficient condition for success? Like
I don't know. Hard for me to say because I can't go about it in another way.
It is what it is.
I think of myself as, maybe not the smartest coach in the space, maybe not the best at analyzing data, but I think that I have to be one of the most passionate, and I have to care about my guys more than most people care. And I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can to get there. So I don't know, if it's necessary, but it's how I'm made. And really, I just kind of live for it.
Sure. And to your point, I mean, when I hear things like, like smartest or, the best data analyst and all these things are actually incredibly hard to quantify.
Sure,
Like
they're subjective.
They're very, very subjective. And again, what works for one person may not work for other, right? It's another person. Some people understand with metaphors. Some people understand with just numbers. Some people understand, with emotions. It's just very difficult to tell what works. But
And
the passion that you're talking about is something that is tangible in some sense, because you're essentially saying, listen, I act this way. You don't like, I act as if this is the most important thing to me. I don't need to quantify it in a different way. That you have the most important quantification, which is I spend all of my time into this.
Yeah, and to be fair, like the person that I'm really competing against is the one that I look in the mirror every day, and that person has many places to upgrade in their life, right? Like I can do better, right? And that to me is fun. It's challenging. It's a target to shoot at, like I said, and I love progression. I love getting better at things. This maybe that's just like an overall macro interest of mine, is just like I love leveling up.
That's right. That's why I said thank God, not because I know what God is, but because it's a good thing that you actually have to work on in progress, right?
Sure,
Makes life
absolutely.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. All right, so number 2 for you.
Number 2 for me, probably I'm gonna have to put fitness. Like just change the topic a little bit. I think that it's one of those things that help me stay balanced in some way. I'm not necessarily the best person when it comes to nutrition, although like I'm trying my best. And in this day and age, it's so like we have no room for excuses, right? I mean, there's so much information, much of that, and I'm talking about good information available. Like people are competing on places, for example, like social media, like YouTube, they're competing for viewership, and the quality of content has gone through the roof. Like there are situations where people have performed better than professionals, some of the people who are doing like amateur work in certain areas. But and it's interesting because I know that in my space of mathematics, for example, I see a lot of people with like lower level degrees that are doing an excellent job explaining difficult ideas. So even in mathematics, even in hard science and places like that. But anyway, so fitness, I think, is something that interests me very much. And because I
What's
suck
the
at
end
sport,
goal? The end goal with fitness for you?
I'd say probably it's strength of, I mean, health will be one, not in any particular order, but strength of mind is another one. The idea that like every time I go to the gym, like I feel like I'm going to die, like every single time. Like that hasn't changed, and I've been doing this for like 15 years, and like I literally feel every time like, why do I do this to myself? But then in some sense, there is like a certain strengthening. I mean, it's similar to, I guess, those familiar with David Goggins. I mean, the idea of callousing the mind. I think that's an excellent idea, an excellent metaphor, that things things around life become easier when you survive a day at the gym. And it's the absolutely the worst time of my day and the best time of my day,
Yeah.
Basically.
Charles
So,
Dickens.
Charles, is it
Best of
really
time and the worst of time.
best of time and the worst of time? Right. Yes.
How do
So
you get motivated to keep going to the gym when you know that it's going to be the worst of time while you're there?
right. So this is something that I worked tremendously like over time. And what I mean by work tremendously over time is the idea that I thought to myself, it's a sacred thing. Like I don't skip gym days because of exact that very reason. I know that if I ever skip a single gym day, I'm going to be, yeah, maybe today is another day to skip a gym day. So it sort of like becomes like brushing my teeth. It's like, oh my God, I have to do it. I have to do it. No matter what many excuses I'm gonna show. I know I'm gonna go to the gym eventually. Just get it on with your life. Just go there, get it over with. Just go there. And I think a lot of it is that. And because again, I feel terrible if I don't. So it has become a habit at this point. But at the beginning, sorry.
No. I agree. Like I look at these things, the way that I think about them are kind of like gifts to my future self is really how I like think of them in my head when I'm like meal prepping, making my shake the night before, taking care of laundry or dishes or whatever. I'm like, I think of them as like a gift to a future self. Like the gym is a gift to yourself later that day or tomorrow or next week, whenever you have high energy levels, you need to get a lot of stuff done, you want to go on a hiking trip and it's like 7 miles or whatever it is, or just like to sleep well at night and to feel strong and to feel better and have more energy, right? Like these are all gifts to your future self, that in the moment there's a lot of pain there, there's a lot of resistance, right? But it's an investment. It's sort of the way that I frame it in my own mind.
Oh, that's a very, very good way of putting it. And if I were to say like the two things which are actionable, at least they work for me, one good and one bad. I'm gonna start with the bad one. I've ruined my body, like basically. So what I'm
Isn't
saying,
that contrary to the goal?
that's exactly right. I mean, it is. Yeah. So one has to be careful, right? So obviously, this is, by the way, something that I've seen across the board. Like people who've been doing it, even professionals, they will tell you that they've made a lot of mistakes. And I'm not entirely sure how many of these mistakes are avoidable. You know
Yeah.
how your parents are telling you, you know what, make your own mistakes. You have to, you know, screw it up to learn. So I'm not sure
Hmm.
how much of that is avoidable in the first place. But I'm going to say that, you know, don't just listen to, you know, a bearded guy on, you know, on the internet that says something. Just do your own research, you know, do your own things and try to be as smart as you can with things as you can, because some of the, you know, injuries can be reversible. That's number one. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that probably comes with like maxing.
Mm-hmm.
I think like I've I try to be in tune with my body,
Mm-hmm.
and I won't push myself in spots where I just know that it's probably going to do more harm than good.
Me
Uh,
too.
like on leg day specifically is like after you know, 3 sets of like barbell split squats, for
Mm-hmm.
example, which I hate.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, if I do, you know, the rest of my squats, like I'm not going to be able to walk for
Right.
2 or 3 days, and I risk injuring myself. And trying to be in tune there so that you don't like actually hurt yourself. And then I'm sure there's a lot of guidance on YouTube too about proper form and
For sure.
technique, that the listener should consult with.
Absolutely. I'm just going to push a little bit back on this because this is something that
Sure.
I've been thinking a lot. And myself, and by the way, I'm one of those people that I can't walk for 5 days when literally, and I think I mentioned that before. When I do legs, I cannot walk for 5 days every single time. Like for 15 years, every single time I cannot walk for 5 days. Now, there is something like you will have people like David Goggins, for example, who are willing to get to a point, and I'm not saying that everybody should think like that, but it's an approach. It's an approach
Sure.
that we should consider. Who basically, literally, you know, he's going to start peeing blood and he's going to continue running, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not an obvious question where, how much is too much, because also like the idea of growth requires pushing ourselves beyond a certain point. So
Sure.
there are situations where that's the part that I wanted to push back.
No, I think it's a good point. Um, yeah, it's a good point. I don't think the David Goggins approach is for everybody.
Exactly.
And I do think that like just having an awareness, a keen sense of your body, um, and I think like lots of things are pretty resilient, right?
Yes.
Like lots of our body is more resilient than we give it credit for, so we
Exactly.
can push. I do think there is a point where you can recognize like, oh, I'm going to hurt myself
Absolutely.
if I do this.
Absolutely. And also to double down on your point, it's not even clear if people like David Goggins have net benefited their lives or you know not. I
Yeah,
mean, I have an opinion on that, so I'm not saying that I'm taking one or the other side, but
sure.
there are like anyway I think highly of David Goggins in many respects, but like there are definitely people who are going to tell you, you know what, he's destroyed his body in some sense, right? I mean, and peeing blood is too much, but perhaps peeing blood is one way to tell your body, you know what, it's not the end of the world. You can get stronger. You can, again, it's a very difficult question. It's harder than it sounds. We can't just like say, oh, it sounds ridiculous, because again, we're not sure exactly
Well, I
what our
think
limits
pissing
are.
blood is an indicator that things are not all great.
Oh, great. I
Things
know,
are
I
not
know.
going well.
But maybe you make it harder for the second time for that to happen, right? Maybe you actually gained yourself another extra 2 years of life by actually pushing yourself. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying it's not
Yeah.
crystal clear. The idea of anti-fragility, the
Maybe you
idea
could have a heart attack and die too.
exactly my
You
point,
know,
which is why it's
but
not trivial, right? I mean,
yeah,
you can actually die, and that's my criticism to some of the things. That's why not everybody can do it. But
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah. I'm a big believer in like listening to the body,
Mm-hmm.
and paying attention to the body. You know, I think just as like a tangent, an unrelated tangent. I know we're getting in left field, but
No, that's
like
great. I
there's
love
a
it.
lot of people that like advocate drinking, you know, 10 glasses of water or
Mm-hmm.
however many ounces of water a day. And
Right.
like from the experts that I've read, from the things that I've read about that specific thing, is that we have a really good mechanism as human beings that allow us to drink enough water, and that is we feel thirsty
Mm.
when we're
That's a
dehydrated, right? So like
good point.
I think that like we just tend to overthink some things, and it's like no, we survive because like when we're like 3% dehydrated or 2%, we feel very very thirsty, and then we hydrate up. This is a mechanism that allows us to not die and to survive, right? So you know, overhydrating, again, can be a thing that causes more harm than good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a good segue to the next one. What is next on your list?
Fictional books.
I like it.
Just like I said before, when I'm at the gym, I'm almost always listening to Audible and almost always listening to a fantasy book or a fictional book. I've gone back and forth in my head about, should I be listening to this or should I be listening to some nonfiction, personal growth type book, or, even a podcast that's more personal growth in nature. And my realization is that I just love losing myself in these stories. I love getting to know the characters. I love imagining everything. I always have as a human being. It makes my spirit happy. Listening to these books, and so like it's just going to be a part of my life until the end. So like whenever I love an author and I get into a fictional story, I'm just going to consume that material as quickly as I possibly can. I often go to Goodreads and search for a specific genre and filter by rating to find like the best books in the genre, the highest rated books that I haven't read yet, because I'm also aware that I'm a maximizer and I have a limited amount of books that I'm going to read in my life. So I want to hit all the best ones. So yeah, that's something that I'm very interested in. And like, if I'm decompressing and not thinking about poker, generally I'm walking around somewhere with, AirPods in and listening to a book.
I love it. And you take advantage also of some dead time potentially, right? I mean, let's go super meta. Top 5 favorite fictional books or stories, or
I would say so
it doesn't have to be
the book aspect is hard for me. I think author wise, I'm listening to Joe Abercrombie right now, the First Law series. There's I think 10 books. I'm at book 8. I've been listening to those for a while. I really, really enjoy them. I find myself loving the narrators. I think that some of the skill of narrators is just unbelievable, out of this world. Right. So yeah, Joe Abercrombie, Brandon Sanderson, pretty much anything that he writes in the realm of fantasy, I'm going to read. Patrick Rothfuss, who's written 2 books of a 3-book trilogy, and we've been hanging with bated breath for 10 years now for the 3rd book. Need to figure out what's going to happen to Kvothe. Those 3 authors, George R.R. Martin, I've read all of his books, although again, it's been 10 years since the last one was released. I probably need to read the whole thing again before picking up the new one, because I've forgotten all the plot points, because the show diverged quite drastically from the book series.
Do you like the ending? Did you like the season 8 on Game of Thrones?
I hated season 7 and season 8. I thought they were not good. The ending of Game of Thrones, I thought it just, instead of tying things up neatly and nicely, they just blew everybody up and sort of hammered everything to conclusion, which I wasn't a big fan of. I think the whole Dany character arc it just felt forced and way too fast. The breaker of chains in one season, who cares about cities and the kids and the slaves and everybody, just a little while later is just burning everybody alive. I didn't really, that her whole character arc just felt like
spoilers, by the way,
rushed. If you haven't seen Game of Thrones by this point, maybe you'll never watch all of Game of Thrones.
Watch it. Yeah. A certain a thing that happened to the dragons, that was again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, that was pretty weird too, sending the dragons to anyway.
Anyway, so those books, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, I've read those probably two or 3 times each. I love those. I think that's a pretty good summary of the books that I'm.
Tolkien, or are you interested in that?
I actually haven't read Tolkien.
Okay.
I read I tried reading The Hobbit when I was in the 6th grade,
and
I just hated it.
Yes,
I hated it. I couldn't like, there were so many characters I couldn't
I
keep
know.
track, and I was like, I don't like this, and I put it down, and I just never picked it up. And then I watched the
Yeah.
movies, and I was like, oh, that was good.
Makes sense. Yeah, there's so much stuff that they didn't put in the movies. I mean, these books are incredibly dense, and
Yeah,
it's fascinating how a person created, he basically created a better version of the Bible, essentially. So it was so deep and so condensed. It's just like very, 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 very interesting. Like,
yeah. I mean, I'm again, going back to like this magic in the world that I really value. People that can world build like that, to me, may as well be magicians or wizards. I think it's just an incredible skill to have that kind of vision and flesh it
absolutely.
out and tell stories the way that people do. It's a very powerful thing, and it just leaves me in awe every time
Absolutely.
I experience it.
Have you read The Witcher? Like any of the?
Nope, haven't read
Yeah,
any of The Witcher either.
that's
No.
pretty interesting. But interesting ones too.
So let's kick it back to you. We're on number 3 here.
Yeah,
Number 6 total, I think.
yeah, number 6 total. That's right. So we're going super fast, huh? So we have a lot of things to say about these things. So speaking of The Witcher, I would say one of the things that I really like is video games. Like, yeah, the thing about video games, I'm very picky. I'm not particularly dexterous when it comes to as you know very well. So I'm not good at sports. So like I'm interested, but video games have, I don't know like how much in tune you are. I mean, you mentioned like Path of Exile in one of our earlier podcasts,
Yeah.
but like you hate that game, I know.
No, I love the game.
Okay.
That's why where the hatred comes from, is in loving the
I love
thing.
it too much, yes.
Yeah.
So I think that video games, like there is a tremendous amount of spectrum. Like probably, I mean, I started with like the adventure. I'm not talking about action adventures. I'm talking about the actual adventures, point and click adventures, like that the Sierra and like that Lucas Arts, that and RPGs like Baldur's Gate. That was one of my favorite. They made a new one now, and I think there's like a tremendous amount of creativity that can be found in those games, and it's an excellent way also to do storytelling. There's some games in particular, if you don't mind reading, like some.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that is I can't stand storytelling in games. Like, I
Interesting.
love stories, I love listening, I love reading, I love the way the books smell. I love it, all of it.
I
But
see.
in video games, I'm like, I don't care. I just want action. Like,
Action. Yeah.
I want to battle. I want to like
Sure.
slay monsters and crawl dungeons and kill things. And like whenever people talk, I'm just like spamming the button that skips all the talking. Like,
I
let's
see.
go,
I
let's
see.
go.
So
Which is strange.
speaking of spamming the button, are you interested like in challenging games like any of the From Software games like Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne?
I haven't played them, and I think what's interesting is like I think that video games to me are something that I have somewhat of an addictive personality, which the listener may have clued in on over time. And video games feel more like a waste of time to me than listening to a book on audio while I'm at the gym or taking a walk or cleaning the house or doing some kind of secondary activity. Like, the thing that feels really good to me is when I play video games like Rocket League with 4 or 5 friends on a headset, and there's like the fellowship aspect of it.
Right.
But I actually start feeling like, like I love cake, but I feel like I've eaten 5 cakes when I sit down and play Path of Exile for like 7 hours.
Yes, there's something to be said about that. Yeah,
Too
no, but
indulgent.
if I were to push back a little bit, and again, actually, it's not so much as pushing back as like a different perspective, because you can have 2 different perspectives on the video games, right? So, like for example, Path of Exile. For those of you who don't know, there is a skill tree in Path of Exile, which is probably like the biggest skill tree that they've ever created on any video game ever. So if you are like a mini-maxer, you look at this skill tree that goes basically indefinitely, and you're trying to optimize which path to take. And I think there is something to be said, at least for me, that's why I'm saying different perspectives. There's something to be said about the challenge of actually essentially making the game easier for you, like finding ways to sort of like exploit the game, but in a non-cheating way, right? I mean, to find ways to make your character stronger enough to, and I find that's why I like games where you can actually you can use your brains a little bit to sort of like sidestep some of these difficulties.
I'm a maximizer, as I said,
Right,
and
right.
Path of Exile plays into all of my impulses very, very well.
I
I
know.
Yeah, like I've created 5,000 spades names when I played online spades. I've
Right.
created 1,000 Diablo characters trying to figure out the perfect build. And if I mess up one skill point and
You go
can't get
back.
it back, then I just start a brand new character.
Right, right.
Like I'm a classic maximizer. And yes, the skill tree in Path of Exile is obscene and makes it extremely complex, very hard to make like the best character, which is a very clever way of making a game that people get addicted to and play a lot of it. Because then, every once in a while they have a new season where they change something
Right,
fundamental
right,
to the game. And so
right.
like even if you found the best character, well now you've got to start over again and things have changed. So maybe you've got to alter that as well. So it's a very, very cleverly built game. Actually, one of my poker students from 6 or 7 years ago moved to New Zealand, and he's a game tester for Path of Exile specifically.
Nice.
So yeah, they've done a good job, and that's why I have to avoid it.
Exactly right. I guess one last thing I wanted to say about video games before I forget is that one experience that I've never had before. Remember how we're talking about callousing your own mind? The idea, like I tried one from Soft Game, Sekiro, which basically it was like I joked at some point on Twitter that it was like essentially playing tournaments back to back, getting bubbled like every single time for like a year. Right. That's how it essentially felt. And because I have like this tendency of like wanting to finish things, I finished this goddamn thing. But I gotta tell you, there were bosses that I was actually fighting for 4 days straight to beat. Like this is just, I'm not good at dexterity. So some people who like finish the game may have like different experiences. But that was something that I wanna share. So I was very happy I finished that game, but I will never touch another From Software game as long as So it's, like it's sort of like callousing in some sense, because you're like, okay, at least I finished it and I can tell people I finished it. There you go, public. I finished it. So now you know.
Yeah. And
So
there's
what
only a select subgroup of people that are actually care or that are impressed, and that's the people that have experienced the game itself.
badge? Let's get a badge of honor right here, or shame. I don't know. So what's next?
So the fourth thing on my list is just human behavior, psychology, just why people do the things that they do. I think it ties into poker and my love of poker just very, very well. It ties into my drive to communicate and be a leader very, very well. I'm trying to understand human behavior. So like, again, I think this is more of like a macro thing of, I'm just fascinated by human beings. Like we're just a fascinating species. And why do we do the things that we do? Like why across the board do kind of weak poker players do the same thing despite not, having a convention where they discuss strategies and share it with each other, right? Like it has to be sort of innate in human biology. Why do people do the things that they do? Why do they tweet the things they tweet? Why are they the way they are? Why are people simultaneously so terrible and also so hilarious? Why are they so enraging, but also are the thing that allows you to experience the most joy on the planet? In my case. So it's like, there's these, it's just fascinating to me. I love human beings. I love thinking about human behavior. And so, that's another one of my hobbies.
Do you have any influential psychologists or philosophers because a lot of philosophers also talk about psychology that, they've influenced you, or people you admire in that space?
I would just say podcast wise, philosophize this. I really love, and it's not exactly like human. It's not a psychology
Mhm.
podcasts, but I like hardcore history. I like
Mhm.
learning about the things that we've done in the past and why humans kind of behaved in the way that they did, or trying to better understand, how have we progressed over the last 100 years, just exponentially in a way that nobody 100 years ago would even recognize this
Absolutely.
planet and the society that we live in today. Like that's something that's interesting to me and pulls me in and something that I think about.
Excellent. Love it. Love it. Psychology,
Yeah.
obviously, one of my subjects too. I didn't add it to the list, but I'm very interested in psychology as well.
All right. And I would wonder why, but we got a show to go on. You,
So
you tapped into my human behavior.
I love it.
Yeah. Number
So
8.
number 8. So number 8, I would probably have to put um, physics, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to add biology there for good measure, and some of the other hard sciences, like in particular, the theory of evolution, I think explains a lot of things that at first seem very weird, like for example the existence of psychopaths. Talk about psychology, right? I mean, psychopaths. So those of you who've been here in the podcast before know that I'm very interested in like how weird psychopaths are and how frequent actually they are in our population. About somewhere between 0.5% and 2%, depending on who you ask. And it's interesting. Like, why do we have people like that in the population? And evolutionary theory can give some answers to that. Like, there are specific tasks, and usually these are tasks that society needs at some point. Some people may call that wars, or may call it, today we call them surgeons, people who have to like basically not give a damn about certain things, like empathy, for example. So I would say that biology, very, very important. But specifically physics, I'm working on a project, which also probably I'm going to be working for the next 10 years. I'm trying to actually like understand like all of the physics, like the major, basically, rules of the universe. And I'm writing a scientific book, where basically I'm collecting all the necessary mathematics and all the necessary physics required. I'm not a physicist. I have to. So for me, it takes extra effort because I can only draw from some of my knowledge from mathematics. But physics is a completely different subject.
Are
So
you going to get famed narrator Stephen Pacey to narrate your scientific journal?
I don't think I'm ever going to publish it. Like I don't care. I just want it for me. Like I
Well,
just
then I'm
want.
not listening to it,
Okay,
Duncan.
got it. Okay. You set me up for this. That was an easy one.
Good,
Number
man.
9.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
just to
oh,
expand
sure,
just a moment, I think
sure.
all physics, biology, all of these things kind of go into, like, in my opinion, human behavior and the world, just the
Absolutely.
the world at large. You asked me a question last week, by the way, on about spirituality and
Mhm.
um, about whether it's something like inherent in the world that we live in, like
Mhm.
consciousness or awareness. And I was thinking about it afterwards and just wanted to add a thing that, like,
Please.
because of the law of conservation of matter, like matter can't be created or destroyed, right? So
Mhm.
basically the ingredients to whatever consciousness is were here from the jump. So
Mhm.
I don't know exactly what those ingredients are. I just know that, like, they had to be here because where else could they have come from?
Absolutely. And just to add something, I mean, it is Philosophical Friday after all, so we might
Sure.
as well throw a couple of philosophical things. One idea that I had, and incidentally, I have a lot of ideas, like the majority of which are trash, right? Just FYI. But one of the ideas that have crossed my mind was the idea that there was a certain proximity during the Big Bang, right? So not just sort of like your atoms and my atoms, and like everybody who's listening, atoms were like close to one another, like to the point where closer than it would be like if they were sitting at a pin, but also the atoms that now make the Andromeda, or the atoms that make like galaxies which are far, far away. So they're actually, everything was close to one another. So there is at
I mean, the
least
rock that we live on, right? It
the rock that
landed
we live
here
on.
from, light years away. It kind of collected mass. And so, like, within our bodies, we have pieces of stars from light years and light years away. That to me just kind of blows my mind. It's just
Correct.
insanely fascinating.
But I wanted to take it one step further, and I want to say something that might sound like a little bit of woo-woo, but I don't mean it as a woo-woo. There might be a certain connection between us, not just the humans, but everything in the galaxy. There might be some connection, some causal connection, right? Because again, we were very close to, like, our atoms were very close to one another, which means there might be some
My
similarities
atoms
between.
didn't have shit to do with your atoms, Duncan.
Okay, so everybody
Your
else's
atoms were on the
atoms.
other side of the tracks from my atoms.
Everybody else's atoms except for Brad. But I was like, hey, screw you guys.
Get away from me. I need my space.
That's exactly right. So, but I mean it like in a causal kind of way. Like, this is just something to ponder about. I'm not saying that's a good theory. I'm just saying that it's
interesting.
Something to think about.
Yeah, exactly. It's something to think about for sure.
Absolutely.
My final one, which will be a shock to everybody listening. High performance.
Right.
Just maximizing again, body, brain, across the board. What can I do to maximize performance in all areas across life? How do I help the wolves perform higher? Just, whether it be sleep, nutrition, fitness, all of those are kind of rolled into high performance for me. Meditation, just looking at cognitive biases and trying to minimize their impact, being unbiased while playing poker, helping people navigate their narrative storytelling while they're playing poker, just every area of high performance, both physically and cognitively and spiritually, that I can find, is just, very near and dear to my heart.
I love it. So are there any specific some go-to either sources or people on something that inspire you for high performance?
I mean, Tim Ferriss is obviously has lots of ideas on high performance, but I'd say my general ethos is just experiment.
Right.
Never be afraid to try something that might be different and try to learn, test out different things. I think a lot of things you can test offer asymmetrical returns.
Right. Don't be afraid to piss blood,
Yeah, that has an asymmetrical return, probably right. one way or the other. I don't know if it's good or bad.
That's exactly right.
But it's probably asymmetrical. Yeah, just I think being curious and not being afraid of leaving your comfort zone or doing something that might feel uncomfortable. That all of those things just appeal to me in a big way. And also, I think they're also useful for all the projects that I work on and for just the way that I would like to live my life. Just doing whatever I can to perform at the highest possible level, and then helping other people who are in my sphere also perform at the highest level they're capable of, I think is another thing that's very near and dear to my heart. I put a lot of pressure on myself to maximize my ability, and I put a lot of pressure on the people who are under my watch to maximize their ability and to not coast, not get comfortable, and try to basically help them realize their full potential, because I genuinely, I'm an optimist and believe in the human spirit. And I believe that in most area, at least in my life, I think that the thing that stopped me from progression was simply my own inability to believe in myself. And yeah, so high performance, big thing, big part of my life.
And I would even add to that, if you don't mind, that it's not so much necessarily optimism, but believing in yourself. It's not about optimism. It's just that the potential is real. It's a real thing, right? I mean, if you don't do anything about who you are, you will never gonna get any results. If you don't even try, you're gonna fail by definition, right? So there is something to be said. It's not necessarily the optimism. It's about the mantra of give it a shot, see what happens.
I just think that in general, as humans, we sell ourselves short, and we can do more. And it could be projection. I could be projecting that on people, but I know I could have done more.
Sure.
And I know that I've got a lot to give, and I have a big vision for Chasing Poker Greatness. I have a big vision for the Wolves program. And so I just have to give it everything that I have, and I've got to be my best self, and I've got to require other people be their best selves as well. That's how we get there at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
10 of 10. You
Yeah.
can close down the show, Duncan. This better be a
Short.
game changer.
Well, is art a game changer?
No.
Depending who you ask. You know, if you ask somebody like Nietzsche, he's going to tell you that art is everything, right? Because someone like Nietzsche will tell you that there's nothing like that Plato was an idiot, and that nothing real exists other than our empirical perceptions of things. So like the best way to understand reality is just through art, because that's the only tangible thing. There's no such thing as theories and stuff, and I'm oversimplifying, of course, but specifically music. I'm very interested in music, both actively and passively. All of my life, like I had a dream, and that dream was I wanted to be able to play tunes just by listening to them, just by ear. So I hear something and I do it, and for the longest time I thought I was incapable of it, until I realized that I haven't practiced enough, so my fingers can actually go quickly to the places that they're supposed to go. So that's one long-term sort of like goal of mine, to get better at music. In my mind,
no, I think I tend to agree that everything is art, and I think art is the thing that makes us humans, right? Like that's the thing that separates us from machines. Is our creativity and our art. And it can be active. I think like it doesn't have to be like painting or even music. I think that the way that Phil Ivey plays poker is his art that he's sharing with the world, or terrorizing his opponents with.
I guess last philosophical question: do you think reality is art, or there's more to reality than just art?
So give me more tangible question here, because that's quite abstract.
Yeah, it is very abstract, and it's a difficult question, right? I mean, it's the idea that basically everything we do, everything we try to understand about the world, everything we express about the world is some sort of like always comes in an indirect way. Like we don't really we don't really understand it in a direct sort of way, reality, but we just try to approximate it through our senses. And anytime we talk about what reality is, at least that's one theory. I mean, or that's the question: is that theory sound to you or not? So one theory is that everything that we do, everything that we express, effectively comes down to some form of like an artistic expression of what life is. So we can never go beyond that. If we really want to talk about reality, it's always going to be through art. There's nothing else. So like even logic is can only be expressed through art. Even hard science can only be expressed through art. And art, of course, can take a more or a less general form as you want to take. So what are your thoughts on that?
I would tend to agree. I think that all of reality is art. I think it's a hard thing to like prove one way or the other.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I think that we look at the world through our eyes, and through the way that we we see things, we hear things, we smell things, we feel things, and different animals see, hear, smell, feel differently. They see different light spectrums. They experience the world in very different ways than we do as humans. And so like I do think that experience is art in that sense, in that I don't know of a way to objectively show reality as it is, right? How is that even done? I think it's probably impossible. And then no matter in which way that you try to show objective reality, I think that there's just some subjectivity.
No, absolutely.
So
absolutely. I mean, rationalists were going to just try to show you that logic exists independently, but that is like a very long story and very difficult to, like you said, to prove either way.
Yeah, I think it's just human beings have a capacity to create, understand, and tell stories, and that to me is our greatest strength, and really the heart of what it means to be a human being, and the thing that I value the most. So yeah, I would think that most everything is art.
Very good. Everything is art. Maybe that should be the title of today's podcast.
Everything is art. There you go.
I love it.
There's
So
some psychopath listener who's named Art, and he's like, "Whoa, what is this about?"
it's funny because there's a poker player by the name of Art. So
yeah, maybe you should ask him if he's a psychopath. This might be the podcast for him.
That's right. For the record, he seems like the exact opposite of a psychopath, like a great guy with a good empathy.
Yeah, so, I mean, wouldn't that be how a psychopath acts, though?
No, the thing is, I don't know. Like, let's not go there. Let's not go there because you can tell. Yeah, there's a theory that you can feel it in your spine, something weird when these people are present. But if people have, like any stories or any things that they want to share with us, where can they find us?
Greatnessvillage.com. Head there. Why Alex Beats Bobby. YouTube.com/Why Alex Beats Bobby, BOBBIE. Twitter.com/CBG podcast. Those are all of the spots. Subscribe to the podcast on whatever audio place you're listening to this at. And if you want to torture Duncan, just ask him a question in the Philosophical Friday channel and make him type 3,000 words that he can't help himself not do it. It's compulsive. So, psychopaths, here's your chance to terrorize Duncan. Doesn't even have to be a logical question. Make it nonsensical. That'll drive him even crazier.
Play into my obsessions. I love it.
Yep.
And let us. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna close it down. So you're
Beautiful. No, I just want to say, if people like this type of format, like it's a little bit more casual from time to time, let us know what you think. It's always good to have some feedback, and then we have some ideas of some topics to cover. But it's useful sometimes to know like our backgrounds, where we're coming from, even though sometimes some things feel obvious. I mean, we obviously like love poker and obviously philosophy and all these things, but it's nice to have like
I think I'm the only person that genuinely understands how much I love poker. Like this game is, it's my obsession right now.
I love it.
Maybe one day in 5 years, something else will be, but right now my entire world is hell-bent on, yeah.
And I want to say one thing. You're absolutely right. You're the only person who understands, but you may be underestimating how much I get it. So that's the only thing that I'm going to say.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you to the listener, and we will catch you next week.
Absolutely. Pleasure as always.